For those of you who are new to our panel, I'm the director of the Korean Studies Institute here at USC, and we're delighted to be hosting the National Committee on North Korea, which is a nonpartisan national organization designed to raise awareness about North Korean issues. And so one of the things that we wanted to do in our open panel is talk about how media interprets North Korea, the kinds of images that we've got. And some of you may know, very fitting, about an hour ago, I guess, on Twitter and Weibo in China, there was a rumor that Kim Jong-un had been assassinated, and it has like exploded all across. Gawker has it. It's Huffington Post, I guess, now is putting it up. And it's a very interesting media environment that we're in, where somebody can or tweet in China a rumor, and it is already national or international news. So I think this is a very timely panel. Our first speaker will be Sandra Fahy, a postdoc at USC here at the Korean Studies Institute. She has her PhD from University of London SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies, and her research was interviewing North Korean refugees in Korean, both in Japan and in South Korea. So she has some very interesting perspectives. Our next speaker, I guess, will be Bob Carlin, who, as I mentioned before, is a former State Department and intelligence official. He's now at Stanford. And our final panelist will be Choe Sang-hun, who is the award-winning journalist for the New York Times. So we're delighted to have all three of them here today. And I thought I would just turn it over to Sandra to make to start us off.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Dave, for asking me to do this. I'm really honored, and I'm sort of envisioning this as more of a collaborative thing, because I'm not necessarily a media expert person, and I don't really have any opinions on this per se, but I just want to share what I see as some patterns which are emerging, particularly since the turn of the millennium. And these seem sort of quite significant patterns in my view, so I just want to share a few of those with you. But before I begin, I just want us to kind of consider what is the importance of media for us, and how do media and policy relate to one another? And can the media influence public opinion enough that it would then influence policy? And the other thing that I want to say is that, and I think this is fair to say, that no Korean, no ethnic Korean, wherever they live, stands outside of this division of the country. Everyone who is ethnically Korean, I think, is implicated in this struggle for a unified Korea, whether they want to be implicated in that discussion or not. So here are some of the things that I have seen at the turn of the millennium in terms of film. I'm going to talk about film and books, not so much newspapers, which may be disappointing, but perhaps you can offer those insights on newspapers. You know, I think it was 2000 we saw JSA was produced, Joint Security Area, and that was a film which showed conflict between North and South Korea right at the Joint Security Area. And it showed a conflict of relationship, but it also showed that those fraught relationships were also, Koreans were somehow bounded together. They were the self-same people divided by these ideologies. In 2004, we saw the film Spy Girl, which I guess in Korean is 그녀를 물으면 간첩. So I didn't know she was a spy, I guess would be the literal translation of it. And it's the story of a South Korean man who fell in love with a woman who lived in South Korea. He didn't know that she was a North Korean spy, and then all the fraught issues that come with that. Then in 2005, we had the film Welcome to Dongmakgol, which brought in the triad, the three relationships: North Korea, South Korea, and of course, the United States. And this is something which I think we saw emerging as well with the film Gwemul. Some of you might remember. I think Gwemul, how do you translate Gwemul? Would be like crazy monster or something? I'm not sure. Oh, can you hear me better now? Did you hear anything I just said? Yes. Okay. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, so I was mentioning the film Gwemul, which sort of represents South Korea's relationship with the United States. And what I saw here as a pattern, specifically with the film Dongmakgol, is that the United States was somehow seen as this this character which was causing difficulties between North and South Korea. And Goemul represented that even more further in terms of America and South Korea's relationships. And then two interesting things have begun to happen, I guess, since 2008. We saw the film Crossing, Kurosing in Korean, which was based entirely in North Korea, and I think a bit in Mongolia as well. And that film kind of totally shifted the perspective. Normally these films are based in South Korea, about or on the DMZ, and then immediately we shifted into North Korea. And then in 2011, we saw the film, maybe some of you haven't seen it yet, it was so recently out, Winter Butterfly, 겨울 나비, which is actually directed by a North Korean defector. So we're moving into a type of material that's being produced, which is perhaps more representative, or at least far more diverse than the type of material we saw definitely prior to the turn of the millennium. And so in some ways it's refreshing because it gives us a little bit of a more nuanced perspective, but yeah, I mean, there's still some consistent trends that we're seeing. Now, the other thing that I just want to briefly say is that in terms of the literature that's being produced, for me in my work, I look a lot at North Korean defectors, and I have looked at literature, or I guess we could say memoir or autobiographies that are written by North Korean defectors. And since the year 2000, we have seen increasing numbers of these autobiographies being written by North Koreans. So of course we had with Kang Chol-won's book, The Aquariums of Pyongyang, which was originally published in French and then translated into English. I believe then it was translated into Japanese and then finally into Korean. We also saw a few other books. Let me think. 완전 통제 구역, so the complete control zone, or Shin Dong-hyuk's book, 세상의 밖으로 나오다, which I guess could be translated as out, you know, out into the world or whatever. So these are all books which are written by North Korean defectors, but they're also all books which are written by people who are former political prisoners from North Korea. And I just want to say, we just want to point out something, the asymmetry that I see in this, because we have now about 23,000 North Koreans living in South Korea, about 500 North Koreans living in Japan, and I guess a handful living in the United States, and one or two, I think, living in Canada, a few living in the UK. The type of material that's being written by these individuals is, there's very little being written by people who are just ordinary North Koreans. We have Chae Jin-hee, who wrote 국경을 3번 건넌 여자, the woman who crossed the border 3 times. But that type of material, which shows a more nuanced, a delicate interpretation of life in North Korea, is largely absent from the literature. We see this preponderance of material that's being produced from survivors of the political prison camps. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I'm just noticing that there is this stark asymmetry. If we look at how many North Korean defectors in South Korea are from the political prison camps, if we look at David Hawk's report, we can claim there might be about 100 of them. I'm not sure how many precisely, but there is a stark asymmetry that we would have, I think, about 10 autobiographies now written by former political prisoners, and we don't have literature being produced by other North Koreans. There are many reasons why this might be the case, but it's just interesting to notice that this type of literature emerging alongside the type of material we're seeing in the films, which shows a kind of a more friendly relationship with the North, I would say, what's being demonstrated in the films. So I hope that gives us something to think about and something to talk about. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I want to talk very briefly about North Korean media. And I'll do it by relating to you my experience teaching a class at Stanford several years ago, much smaller than this, I'll tell you. And it was called Reading North Korea. And it was based on the thesis that you can use North Korean media as a window into a whole range of North Korean issues: political, economic, security, social, cultural, if you know how to read the media. And to do that, I was teaching to these students a methodology that we had developed in the US government over many, many years for looking systematically at the output of this controlled media in North Korea. The argument that you frequently hear is, oh, there's no news in North Korean newspapers. Well, there may be no news in North Korean newspapers, but there's a tremendous amount of insights you can glean from the media if you know what you're looking at. One of the things you want to avoid in looking at North Korean media is content analysis, word counts, the sort of thing that you can do wonderfully well with computers. You can generate all sorts of graphs about how many times they used a certain word, and then you draw your own conclusions. What does that mean? I think it's baloney. I always thought it was baloney. I think it's worse today than it's ever been. What's the alternative? The alternative is context analysis. That is, what do they say in what context? And why does the context inform, and should it inform your analysis about their observations, their commentaries, their public statements? One of the ways that we've done this is having worked out, as I said, this methodology, and to teach it to Stanford students, I had to come up with some catchy phrase. And I was sitting in Pete's coffee shop, and I said to myself, I know, I'll call this the latte method. That will certainly stick in their minds. And then I had to figure out, what does latte mean? So it means this. L stands for the level of comment. Everything you get out of North Korea is not equally important. In fact, a great deal of it is unimportant. A lot of it is propaganda, pure, simple propaganda. From a policy standpoint, you don't have to worry about it. It's just gabble, gabble. A, audience. At whom is this particular comment pointed? What audience are they trying to reach? What are they trying to exploit? Sometimes it's strictly a domestic audience. They don't let it out for international consumption. Sometimes it's strictly for international consumption, something that you read on the outside, in case in English, for example, might never make it internally. Well, there's a reason for that. And it's something that you want to analyze and learn over time if there are patterns in what they give to the domestic audience, what they give internationally. The first T is timing. How quickly did they respond to something? Sometimes the North Koreans will respond very quickly to, let's say, an American statement. Sometimes it may take them a much longer time to respond. So you got to ask yourself, why? What's the difference in the speed at which they respond? Does it reflect decision-making in Pyongyang? Does it reflect the fact that they had an answer already to go and they just needed to put it out there? That's where context comes in. Sometimes the lag is meant to signal restraint. Sometimes it really is confusion. Sometimes it's because it's a sensitive situation and they haven't yet decided how they're going to handle it. The other T is tone, and it's the one that we're usually concerned with. How many nasty words do they use? How far is the language that they use from that which your mother would approve? When do they soften, and why? None of these things are subjective, or shouldn't be. All of this is based on patterns and files and being able to go back months and years, and in some cases decades, to see how their comment either evolved or didn't evolve in what situation over time. You can be very sure the North Koreans know what they said last time and what they said a month ago and a year ago and 5 years ago. And if you don't know, then you're not going to have a way of understanding what the changes might be in what they said today. And if there are changes, who made the decision and why was the decision made? That leaves the E in latte, right? And the E is everything else. A lot of things, a lot of other things go into analyzing North Korean media. It's not like a slot machine. It's not like you just feed in a bunch of variables, pull the handle, and you come out with an answer. You're dealing with human beings on the other end. You're dealing with personalities. You're dealing with all sorts of different sorts of influences in the decision making. And that's really what you're trying to get at. This is reverse engineering of decisions. So that the next time you see a North Korean statement mentioned in American media, you want to be very careful and do your best to dig around at context, level. Sometimes people say there was a North Korea issued a, KCNA issued an editorial. No. KCNA does not issue editorials. Nodang Sinmun issues editorials, and those are very high level, and those are very important. KCNA does other things which can be important or not important. And so you need to be aware of each one of these variables so that you can judge yourself from these very sketchy reports we usually get in American media about the true import of what is being picked up and the analysis that's given to it by many not very informed American commentators.
First, let me tell you something called anything goes mentality among foreign media reporters based in Seoul. A lot of news reports about North Korea originate from reporters based in Seoul, South Korea. All of these people are, we associate with each other. I know them very well, and they know me very well. So clearly, there is a something called anything goes mentality. It goes something like this. You see news reports, based on anonymous sources, strange news reports on KCNA or Chosun Ilbo, South Korean media, or websites like Daily NK, and instinctively you think, oh, this is not true, and this is not news. But what if? What if? This is the worst fear any journalist have. They don't want to be left behind. What if this turns out to be true? Well, Kim Jong-un was assassinated, somebody said. And you instinctively believe that, oh, this is not true. This is not going to happen. There's no chance this may have happened. But they ask, what if? So that means you have to do something about it. So, the thing is, Kim Jong-il or North Korea never sends you a protest letter of protest. They never sue you. And more importantly, what you report cannot be disputed by your friends, your colleagues, because they don't know either. So anything goes. So I advise you always to read news reports about North Korea with a grain of salt. But of course, many of these reports turned out to be true and very significant and very important. But the reality is, a lot of these reports are, false, exaggerated, distorted, and self-completing sometimes. Another point I want to make is I think this thing happened for several weeks until several weeks ago. The NIS, South Korean Intelligence Agency, was feeding anonymous news releases to reporters covering Unification Ministry. Unification Ministry is the South Korean government agency in charge of relations with North Korea. So, you know, for several weeks, we have been reading identical articles appearing on South Korean media for many days. I'm not saying that these reports are wrong, but when you read news reports, same identical news reports in every newspaper, identical, you know, down to the word, there is something problematic about it. All this problem is mainly because we don't have enough access to North Korea. I won't go into detail, but basically, you know, there's three ways of getting information about North Korea. One is reporters, you know, make occasional visits to Pyongyang and other parts of North Korea, and their access is a perfectly guided tour. So what they get is pretty expected and repetitive. And another source is North Korean defectors. North Korean defectors are a very peculiar, tiny portion of North Korea, and they are all. If you read news reports and you know you count defectors interviewed by news media, it's an amazingly small group of North Korean defectors who are connected to activist groups based in Seoul. They are being repeatedly interviewed by media. So basically, very small, tiny number of North Korean defectors giving interviews to the media again and again, saying exactly the same things. You have to keep that in mind. And many of these activist groups are, you know, the kind of groups sending balloons to North Korea, calling on North Korean people to rebel against their government. So, you know, when these activist groups prayed out defectors to give interviews to outside media, you have to be careful. I'm not saying that, you know, what these interviews are saying are necessarily wrong, but you have to be careful, and you have to be careful reading news reports based on those reports as well. And there are also the Seoul-based news websites specializing in covering North Korea. And these websites, I understand, financed in part by US taxpayers' money as well. But again, some of these websites are more activist groups than news gathering media. There is sometimes the line is blurred. And again, I'm not saying that, you know, well, some of these reports done by them were, you know, broke very important news. For example, how North Korean government was cracking down on the small markets, and that news was effectively broken by these websites. And also, we remember that it was a South Korean NGO that basically broke news about the famine in the mid-1990s. They did provide some important news, but again, some of these groups have a political agenda, and you have to keep that in mind when reading news information that appears on their website. I meant to say something about the opening of AP Bureau in Pyongyang, but I will skip this. I talked about the lack of access in North Korea, but let me talk briefly about the censorship on the other side of the picture. Well, the censorship is not the right word, but clearly there is a bias in Western media in the coverage of North Korea, I believe. There is certain ideas reconfirmed by generations of correspondents covering North Korea regarding what is news about North Korea. The other day, I was reading an article about North Korea in an American magazine, and I randomly read this article, and I found these expressions: unpredictable army. It's all descriptions of North Korea: unpredictable army, uncertain leadership, and North Korea is trigger happy, And North Korea repeatedly threatened to destroy its southern neighbor and sometimes look like it might. So these are typical descriptions of North Korea. And there is a certain truth about these perceptions of North Korea, but it just gives one aspect of North Korea. For example, this is not the kind of expressions people living in Seoul, for example, have of North Korea. They may, people flying to LA straight out of Seoul, may, they have been watching Hollywood movies so many times, they may feel more threatened on LA streets than living in Seoul and being killed by North Korean bullets. So again, this image of North Korea as a strange country, totalitarian, and regarding North Korea as a source of fun, this forms one fundamental criteria when editors and reporters try to judge what is news on North Korea. Let me wrap up my little talk by saying this. This is a cardinal rule of journalism. People read about the extraordinary. They don't read about the ordinary. So we naturally are attracted to something weird and strange and uncertain and stuff like a trigger-happy army and uncertainty in the leadership. Well, if a news media reports something extraordinary about American society, for example, we interpret that report in the context because we live in US and we know what is the ordinary in the American society. And we just read these extraordinary news reports as entertaining or whatever. But the problem with news media coverage of North Korea is that we don't know the ordinary. What is the ordinary in North Korea? And we just focus on the extraordinary aspects of North Korea again and again. So extraordinary becomes the ordinary. I'm exaggerating and a little bit here, but I think that's if I summarize it, I think that's the main problem of news media, American news media coverage of North Korea. That's what the little thing I have to say about.
Great. No, I mean, this is, all three of your comments are very interesting. And they all link together about the ways in which, in the United States, I think we have either a set of expectations about North Korea, and I like that phrase, the extraordinary has become ordinary, so that we expect to read books by people who survive prison camps, which are horrific, but then we think that's the entire existence of North Korea, and then anything that North Korea actually does right, we tend to just ignore because we think it's all propaganda, and we miss out on getting some real clues. So I thought I'd ask one question about, like, if we take that for granted, and we were talking about this earlier this morning, what is the way in which, especially with this roar of commentary in the last year, in the last 6 weeks after Kim Jong-il died, what's the role for people like around the table, or for those of us who are writers or journalists, in terms of counteracting that, right? I mean, do any of you have any thoughts about what's the role, what's the strategy for trying to present? Because the one thing I've noticed, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, I'd love to hear what you guys think, right? Is like, if you do say North Koreans are actually, they're sort of normal, then people think immediately you're defending the regime or something like that, which is not the case, right? The whole goal is a nuanced view. But to do anything other than criticize North Korea is to be considered to be apologizing for it. And it's so politicized, it's very hard for us to talk about North Korea reasonably. So I wonder if any of you have thoughts, because you all in different ways have attempted to do that. So I'd love to hear experiences or whatever else. So does anybody want to jump in? Do you have yeah, you guys will share that, we'll share this one.
You go. No, I don't have anything to say. Oh, you don't have anything to say. An honest man. A long time ago, when I was young, I thought that the way to deal with this was sort of the water on the stone approach. You just keep plugging away, you keep sort of trying to do a fact-based approach and point out to people little by little where they're wrong and what really is right. And that was absolutely submerged by exactly what you said. Americans have a devil of a time dealing with a place like North Korea in their own minds, emotionally and morally. It is so easy to stereotype and only look at the extremes. This is exactly what you said. That honestly, I have not yet figured out what's going to work. I've tried all sorts of things. And just when you think, for example, from 1993 through 2000, we made enormous progress with the North Koreans in terms of political engagement, numbers of agreements that were actually signed, implemented. We had levels of trust going up. We had the Secretary of State landing in Pyongyang and talking to Kim Jong-il. We had agreements queued up, ready to roll. And on January 21st, 2001, when a new administration came in, it completely, totally, utterly, and in the blink of an eye disappeared. And no one stood up. No one in the media, very few people in academia. No one stood up to say, wait a minute, we have accomplished all this stuff with the North Koreans. Why are we throwing it all away? And that was a pretty serious lesson to me about how we need to build, and I don't know how we do this, but we need to build in the broader population an understanding and appreciation for the fact that we can't just treat this like a boogeyman, because it doesn't work. But as I said, that was 12 years ago. And we've made no progress. So enjoy the sun. That's all I can say.
Okay, well, yeah, I do have an idea. This would be a long-term project, though. In my personal experience as someone who's a Korean studies scholar, but who is primarily focused on North Korea, I think that when we have more of a balance within Korean studies that looks not only at South Korea, but also North Korea. I mean, if you look at the universities in North America, Canada, and the United States, or anywhere, when we talk about Korean studies, we're talking about South Korea. And I think that I know that South Korea provides a lot of funding for this type of work, but when and if South Korea, and the South Korean government has been tremendously generous in terms of research on North Korea, but when we can create more of a balance, and when there can be that promotion of North Korean studies, just as we have seen with South Korean studies, and that it isn't demonized, and that we're not considered, apologists or people that are somehow brainwashed by proxy, I think then we'll have a better understanding about North Korea and greater nuances. And when news like the death of Kim Jong-il breaks, places like the BBC won't have to turn to people that actually have no expertise on North Korea, but know a little bit of something about Eastern Europe, and ask them to speak about what's going on. That's what happened. It was humiliating. I was embarrassed on behalf of the BBC. So when this stops happening, when we can, when the US government or the Canadian government and other places become more interested in supporting Korean studies that's about the entire peninsula, I think then we'll be in a much better place to talk about North Korea.
I think media coverage immediately following the death of Kim Jong-il highlight the problems I mentioned. When Kim Jong-il died, and everyone was asking, so what's going to happen to the power succession? And I believe, including myself, most journalists, including myself, I believe that we were thinking, there won't be any problem. This will go on very smoothly. And North Korea knows they have their own rule book about power transition. They have gone through this once already. And they are evil and they are horrible, but they know they're stopped. But this is not news. News is uncertainty, the young age, strange dynastic communist country. This is news. So many journalists end up focusing highlighting that aspect. Well, again, there is truth on that aspect. He is young, and there is uncertainty, but there's a lack of balance. If you read news reports for the first day and second day, you hardly see any analyst or journalist commenting on, the possibility of the power transition going forward without a hitch. But these are more thoughtful comments will come in third day and fourth day of power after the death of Kim Jong-il. So that is, we tend to look at North Korea through glasses heavily tainted by ideology and on the media commercial interest, I believe.
One thing I have started to do, and it's really thanks to the internet, I have started to ping reporters. When I see an article where I know there's something wrong in it, and I already have a relationship, I shoot out an email and I say, And in one case, Sang-hun was mentioning sort of the vocabulary, the normal vocabulary that's used for North Korea. I have isolated 3 words that are used to death in North Korea, articles about North Korea. One of them is reclusive. One of them is, I feel like Rick Perry, I don't remember all the words. One of them is isolated. One of them isolated, and it could be paranoid, but the other one is impoverished. And there was an article in the New York Times, not by you, where the reporter used all 3 of them. And I sent him a message saying, congratulations, you hit the trifecta. You used all 3 articles in 2 sentences right next to each other. I've never seen that done before. Your award will be coming out shortly. Well, he wrote a note back. And then he wrote another article. He didn't have one of those words in it at all. So I sent another note out, and I said, congratulations. You proved that it's possible actually to write an article about North Korea without using one of those words. And I got to thank you very much back. The key is, I don't want to make you embarrassed, but these are smart people, despite the fact that they're dogs. Seriously, they're smart people, in my experience. Most of them want to do a good job. They're under a lot of pressure. Because of the web, the pressures now are extraordinary to get something out. And so, yeah, they're going to make mistakes. I don't think it hurts to go back sometimes and say, wait a minute, did you really want to say that? Because my experience is they come back and say, no, that was a mistake. I was writing fast. Thank you very much. I don't think that's going to solve our problem in the largest sense, but I think it helps to do some little fine-tuning, which is useful.
Well, in a way, I mean, especially as we were mentioning, the explosion of media, the web, everybody now has a blog, right? So conventional wisdom can become extraordinarily powerful conventional wisdom with the Team America and things like that, right? So before it was a couple authoritative sources, and I know it sounds trite to lament the internet, but in a way, it makes it even more powerful that we have a good Korea and a bad Korea. And so I think, what we'll do now is let's open it up and try and get some of the audience involved, because I think there's a tremendous number of issues that would be interesting to talk about.
Hi, my name is Ki-young Song. I'm postdoc fellow here at Korean Studies Institute. Thank you for all of you 3. All your comments are very helpful and inspiring. I would like to ask Bob Carlin a question about the recently launched image-making strategy by North Korean leadership. As we know, North Korea began to open up their tourist attraction. Of course, what they call tourist attraction, although it is heavily related to the heritage of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. I don't know how much it is successful so far, but to my impression, what is certain is there are a certain degree of demand. Charles Armstrong was involved in this project, and Jim Hoare in England. As some of you may know, Jim Hoare is the very experienced but retired diplomat who opened up the first ever British embassy to Pyongyang. He was involved in this kind of experiment last year as well. So do you see any possibility for North Korean authority to make use of these kind of experiments to enhance their image in the international community, or to what extent it is tourism program by inviting many Europeans, Americans into North Korea? So to what extent it is going to be successful? What would you say? Thank you.
I would worry that it could, if they're not careful, it could backfire. People are, first of all, this first visit to North Korea is the most dangerous for everybody. When you first go to North Korea, everyone feels as if they just landed on the moon, and they are the first human ever to experience this weirdness. And everything they see, they interpret through this lens of weirdness. I try to actually, before people go to North Korea for the first time, I try to have them play a little game. I say, go out in front of your house at 7 o'clock in the morning and go for a walk on the street and interpret the things that you say, that you see, as if you didn't know where you know, what this was. So you walk down the street and you see, in Washington, D.C., you see potholes. What would you conclude? There's a shortage of asphalt, and the streets are in terrible shape. Here comes a young woman walking by in a really short skirt. Well, they have a shortage of cloth, obviously. It's a big problem here. I did this with a CNN reporter once in Washington, D.C., and their mouths dropped open as they began to see, if you're not careful, if you don't know the context, you can really interpret things completely the wrong way. So this is a problem with the tourism thing. I think unless the North Koreans understand that taking everybody to the Chucha Tower, or the Arch of Triumph, and explaining to them that the number of stones translates into the number of years divided by 6 plus 4, it just is not going to work very well. So it's a good thing that they're letting more people in, but they have to, I believe, they have to refine their ability to cope with that. Maybe Walter has some thoughts.
Walter could give us some.
Walter Keats, Asia Pacific Travel. I've been taking people to North Korea since 1995. I would say that the question is actually a conflation, is that the right word, of things? I don't think that they're promoting tourism. I think we're confusing the Kang, trying to rescue this disaster, economic disaster in Kang, with the rest of tourism. Mr. Hoare went, it was just some British guy put together some tour, and he's doing other countries now, and so that was there. Charles went with me this June. This was not something that Kim Jong-il or anybody in North Korea said, oh, you guys please help us promote tourism. I mean, I don't know that the number of tourists in 2011 was necessarily that much bigger than 2010. I mean, they are constrained. They have 40 English-speaking guides. So every 2 guides per group, that's 20 groups at a time, maximum. It's not like all of a sudden there are 80 guides or 60 guides even. So I disagree that that's there. They definitely have a problem with Kang. I mean, they're dying. I mean, it's a $350 million investment that's sitting there completely gone to waste. And it's very difficult to get there. They tried to get Chinese and others to go there, but it's just so hard to get there. It takes, and who wants to go? South Koreans is the market for Kang, not the rest of us. The Chinese have Wangshan, Taishan, all this sort of stuff. So it's a big problem for them. So anyway, I disagree with the premise that there's a real emphasis on increasing tourism.
They're definitely trying to increase tourism from China.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, but it may be too that that's more on the Chinese side. That is, the Chinese standard of living has increased. They're looking for places. Americans all go to Canada. That's easier for us to do. People in China would go to a nearby place. It's not like
China has a lower standard of living.
Yeah, no. Well, but that they're increasing, so there are more people who have disposable income and are wanting to travel. But you don't see Chinese going there for a week at a time usually. They're more shorter trips, which is not the reason why they're not going to go to Kumgang, and they're sure as heck not going to go take the boat go to Yanji and go to Razon and take a boat to Kumgang. I mean, this is not going to happen, so. Sorry.
All right, good. Brad, Elaine, can you take that over to Brad?
I was wondering whether any of the panelists would be willing to comment on the Chinese media presentation of North Korea. It's very different dynamic in terms of their relations with both Koreas, very different than the American take, and how that is seen in China, and also how we interpret the Chinese presentation of North Korean media issues in North Korea.
First of all, we don't get much from Chinese media based in Pyongyang. Chinese journalists are not the kind of journalists we have in South Korea or in US. They usually, or they seldom do any critical, in-depth investigative reports on the host country they are supposed to cover. I mean, I can't make any comments other than that. I don't remember reading Chinese media based in Pyongyang breaking any important news. A couple of times they sent news alerts a few minutes before KCNA did, but other than that, no, I didn't see any significant, serious journalism coming out of Chinese media based in Pyongyang.
Okay, well, perhaps since you asked the question, you can also share your insights on it if you'd like. And I don't speak Chinese, and I rarely watch Chinese media, obviously, because I don't speak Chinese. But a friend of mine, Leonid Petrov, who's in Australia, he sometimes puts up on his own webpage sites, and he does speak Chinese, I think, and he had a few links of Chinese media right after the death of Kim Jong-il. And maybe somebody can help me out. The name of the woman who gave the report in Pyongyang, does anyone know her name? The woman who was dressed in the all-black hanbok when she gave the report. Anyway, some Chinese media went in and interviewed her, and they were speaking Korean. And I saw the video, and I was struck by how friendly and approachable, and the sense of camaraderie and the friendliness between them. And it was kind of refreshing in a way to see that representation of North Korea and the kind of laid-back presentation, particularly of the media staff from North Korea in the Chinese media. And though I didn't understand, of course, when they were speaking Chinese, but yeah, so it is definitely different from what we see in the United States, absolutely, hands down. But it's because of the type of relationship the United States has with North Korea. The United States can't get the same free access, of course, that China can. So,
let me say something about North Korean television real quick. I went to the North Korean television studios a couple of years ago, and they let us stand there during one of the news reports. And they also have a male news reporter. And before he started, he invited us to come in and stand there. And there's a picture of Pyongyang behind him. And then there's his desk. And what you don't see is that he's wearing sandals. And his chair is so rickety, it looks as if it's going to collapse, during the report. And before he starts, he held up his hand to the cameraman and said, "Wait a minute," took his comb, combed his hair a little bit, put it down, and they said, "Okay." And then they started the news report. And we were standing right there, right next to him. And I could easily have done a shadow puppet on the Pyongyang thing. The whole thing was so relaxed and seemed unlike what you see on the television screen itself, which looks very rigid and almost scary. The feeling in the studio was very, very different. We had the same sense. We went to Minju Chosun, the government newspaper. They invited us to their editorial offices. And we were talking to one of the editors, a managing editor, And unlike the language that they use in the newspaper, the language that he used in the conversation and the topics that he picked to discuss were very normal. They had to do with journalism, concerns about journalism. But then we were talking about cell phones and how important it is to the reporters. And he had on his desk, he had a bank of maybe 6 telephones, regular telephones. And phone rang during the conversation, and he picked up one. Yobiseo, Yobiseo, Yobiseo. He got to the 6th one. It was like Perry White in Superman. You know, it was so human. It brought everything into perspective for me about how the media works sort of at the ground level, as opposed to this screaming vehicle that we think must be there, standing out in front, leading the charge in North Korea.
You know, I think in some ways that this is where Soo-Kyung Kim's book, which I love, by the way, is, and she wasn't able to be with us today, is so interesting because everybody's trying to portray a story of North Korea, to tell a narrative. And we've got one, and as Mr. Choe pointed out, the South Korean narrative about North Korea is different than the American one. It's not nearly as weird or strange. It's got its own issues. North Koreans are telling stories to themselves and to us, and everybody's sort of, in a way, competing, right? Defectors are competing. The tourism sites are competing to tell this story of what North Korea is. And it's very interesting to watch how this happens. I have one small comment, and then we'll get to the next question, which is when I do talks, and you know, like most of us around the table, I do a lot of talks about North Korea, and I've over the last couple of years, I've started to say I'm just going to show a couple pictures, 10 minutes to show North Koreans as human beings. You know, and then we'll get on to whatever the policy is and stuff like that. And you know, the American response is usually extremely open to that because I think they really do want to know, and probably most of them suspect there's something beyond the you know, Team America perspective. It doesn't necessarily mean they want to, they love North Korea, but I think most people realize there's got to be something more than that, and it's very interesting to see how you try and get that out in that type of an issue. We have plenty of time. Does anyone else want to ask a question? Mr. Lee.
My question is directly Sandra Fahy, because you dealt with the Korean refugees. If I may take a minute, about more than 10 years ago, the elder Leroy Brown of Mormon Church went to North Korea with food and medicine. And he met a North Korean general who is specialized in this aid, you know. So he spoke fluent Korean because he was a missionary in the 1960s. So North Korean general was very impressed. And then the Elder Brown told him, this food and medicine I brought is for the poor, hungry, sick people, not for soldiers. And North Korean soldiers, general soldiers, and asked him, are you Christian? Yes, I am. Does God love his children? Yes, he does. So all the children on earth is the children of God? Yes, he does. Does God love all of them? Yes. And the North Korean asked a final question. Well, don't you think a sick and hungry and soldiers are children of God and God loves them all? And Elder Brown got, you know, embarrassing. Oh, yes, he does. So you can use some of this food and medicine for North Korean soldiers, and they talk heart to heart in Korean, you know. So when he left, he told North Korean general, I'll come back more with more food, more medicine in a short time. But after that, President George Bush labeled North Korea as Axis evil, and most of the charitable organizations stopped sending the food and medicine to North Korea. And then, so when you interviewed the North Korean refugees, did anybody tell you, why did the US stop sending the food and medicine? When the dying people, food and medicine doesn't matter who's come from. They will take that, you know. Why did the US, did anybody ask that question? So my question to you is, maybe it's out of your political whatever, but don't you think we should resume sending food and medicine, those sick and hungry and dying North Koreans, and open the dialogue? What do you say?
Thanks for your question, Mr. Lee. Well, you know, I spent, I guess, hundreds of hours listening to North Koreans talk about their experiences of food shortage. And I can assure you that that was, I think, one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life, was listening to those accounts. I think it's extremely misguided for any government to imagine, that to hold back food is something which will provoke revolt or revolution or any kind of political change within a country. A famine is nothing like, you know, a bread riot. Those are totally different phenomena. And so, of course, I think everybody should be entitled to eat and to have access to food. But there's something we need to remember with regards to food in North Korea, or in any country, including this one, that the ability to get food, the ability to access food, is a basic human right. But if the shortage of food exists with the presence of other human rights violations, such as the inability to move within that country to get food where it is distributed, or the ability to cross into China to get resources or food that people need, then the famine or the food shortage is not going to be so severe. So you see, human rights are not singular phenomena. They always exist in plural. So if you are experiencing famine and food shortage, you're also going to be experiencing other violations of human right. So it's not simple that we can say, should North Koreans be able to eat? Everyone in here would say yes. Nobody in here would deny that they should be able to eat. But the problem with North Korea is that the fact that there is indeed a food shortage, and also the inability to access food, that these things are emerging alongside other massive rights violations that North Korea needs to recognize. North Korea needs to permit its people to move within its country freely, to open markets, to buy and sell materials, to cross into China to get the resources they want. When those things begin to happen, North Koreans are going to be able to help themselves, and they're not going to need our aid.
This is primarily for Bob, I guess, but there was a fascinating book published last year called Inside the Red Box, where the author looks in great detail at the publications of the North Korean Workers' Party, the Korean People's Army, and the cabinet, and goes as far to say that in a detailed reading of these papers, you can not only track competition over policy within North Korea, but you can actually identify the points at which different key elements of North Korea's foreign policy, domestic policy, et cetera, were controlled by these different groups within the state. As someone who is deeply informed on how to read North Korean papers, what is your assessment of this? Can we actually drill down that far to identify these trends in the North?
It's almost the same problem as content analysis. That is, you got to look at the context. You got to understand not just what's in the media, but how it appeared. Would anybody seriously approve articles in the media if they knew they directly contradicted decisions by the center? That's hard to believe, for me to believe. If you're talking about policy discussions where a decision hasn't been made yet, then I think I would agree. You might be able to see different points of view being expressed. Once a decision has been made, would you see conflict like that? Based on what we know about North Korea, I'm pretty doubtful. And I think at that point, it's probably an incorrect and over analysis of what appears. But again, it probably depends on the specific circumstances, the specific issue, and the context.
Well, I hope this question is not too inside baseball, but remember maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago when the DPRK was feeling frustrated because maybe it's earlier than that, feeling frustrated because the United States was not negotiating with it. Kind of a situation similar to today. And Ambassador Han Sung-ryol did these interviews. I remember one with the New York Times and maybe there were a couple with other leading newspapers to articulate DPRK position and to express a desire to make progress, which was quite a remarkable thing to do. And then it didn't happen anymore. So I'm wondering if we think we know what that was all about, and was it explicitly squelched by Pyongyang? Obviously, he would not have done this without approval. But, you know, if you think about it, the DPRK diplomats are very inaccessible to the media. It would be an opportunity for them to try to communicate if Pyongyang wanted to send some clearer messages, or especially reassuring messages. On the other hand, one thing that's always so frustrating about DPRK government is that instead of trying to be reassuring, they often feel that they need to bluster and threaten in order to protect themselves. So anyway, just any thoughts about maybe in Europe too, or DPRK diplomats talking to the media?
North Korea, when it finds necessary to talk to the outside world, they do, using diplomats based in New York, Geneva, and Beijing. This has happened several times in my memory, I think. They are very good at delivering their message. They deliver identical messages. You know, as Ambassador Bob King said, they just say what they want to say and take no questions. Most of the news reports about North Korea has been, before the death of Kim Jong-il, has been about six-party talks. And as one of the reporters covering six-party talks, I found North Korea the easiest country to understand, the easiest country whose position, to understand. For me, it's more difficult to understand what South Korea's and Washington's position is in six-party talk than North Korea's position. North Korea is very consistent. And the problem is people try to interpret too much out of what North Korea says. You know, they don't really pay enough attention to what North Korea says. What they say again and again, they say in much detail, and they say many times. And again, you know, it's very important to just sit down and read North Korean statement from the beginning to the end. Just take those messages at face value. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to believe in the message, but you first have to understand what North Korea has to say. They say that very clearly, and more clearly than the US and South Korean governments, I think. And I generally believe that the analysts and media, they try to interpret too much out of what North Korea say.
Hello, my name is Eunice Kang, and I'm a third-year PhD student here at USC. And my question is, I just wanted to get your comments and insight on what you thought about the pro-North Korean bloggers and reporters in South Korea being sometimes interrogated or jailed for being pro-North Korea. So, yeah, what do you think about that issue?
To me.
Any of you. Except me, any of you. I'm just a moderator.
Well, I wrote a couple of stories about this, so I will start answering the question. Well, you know, the government in Seoul denies using the NSL, National Security Law, to crack down on these people. But if you look at the figures, it's clear, it's undeniable that the government is enforcing this law more vigorously than before. There is if you look at the figures, there's a sharp increase in the number of people who were questioned and prosecuted on charges of violating national security law. So there is a clear trend. Then the question is, national security law, the basic problem with national security law is it outlaws activities that benefit the enemy, which is North Korea in this case. And it doesn't clearly define what are activities that benefit the enemy. So owning a copy of a communist manifesto, for me, can be a crime. It's a violation of the law. But the same act is just, just a part of academic activities for other people. So it's totally up to prosecutors to select which people to investigate and interrogate. That is the basic problem with the law. These pro-North Korean bloggers, again, I mean, if you look at the internet in South Korea is a crazy place. It's the ultimate form of a democratic cacophony. People say whatever they want to say. So there are clearly people who say nice things about North Korea, eulogizing North Korea, but at the same time, there are people who try to lampoon North Korean government. But their blogs sometimes it's very difficult to tell. Are this guy praising North Korean government, or are this guy trying to make a parody out of North Korean regime? So again, the basic fundamental problem is the prosecutors to decide which person should be investigated and interrogated. And there is room for the authorities. There's always room for authorities to abuse the law.
This is a question for you were talking about the greater number of prison memoirs that were published in comparison with ordinary people memoirs. If you know about the financial success of those two categories, I'd be interested to know which sells better, which is more popular, as a way to measure how much of it is audience and how much is it the people who want to make a public statement are the people who are doing it both for catharsis or a political point or something like that. And I also wanted to know about, I think someone told me that there's a soap opera about defectors within South Korea. I was wondering if you could comment at all on depictions of North Koreans living in the South.
I don't know the numbers on how well the books are selling, but it's so disproportionate in terms of the number of memoirs and autobiographies by former political prisoners or guards, like I think An Myong-chol, I think he was a former guard in a prison camp, that I would just say almost certainly the prison camp narratives are selling more, at least, or they're being produced more. Whether or not anyone's reading them, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's an interest in that type of literature in South Korea, but there's a certain permanence to books, more than maybe newspaper articles or like a radio announcement. Like if we look at, there are accounts which are put through Chayubukan Bangsong, like Free North Korea Radio. So a lot of North Koreans share their accounts there, and there's far more diversity. It's not all about the political prison camps in that context. And I'm not familiar with the soap opera, but I would love to know if anyone else knows the title. I'd love to watch it. I would just say, I want to talk for a minute and say about my own experience of working with North Koreans in South Korea, and I'm sure there are some other people in the audience who've also had experience working with, like I know Kim Sang-bom, I know you have similar experience to me working with North Koreans in South Korea, that there's an issue of proximity. Like, South Koreans are very interested in North Korea. I'm totally generalizing here, but let me just say, there's a curiosity, and North Koreans are kind of sacred because they're brethren, but they're also profane because they represent this danger, and there's been, of course, an indoctrination and education about, there's been an education in South Korea about how bad North Korea is, et cetera. It's definitely changed over the last couple of decades. But my own proximity to North Koreans was something which made me suspect. And I remember I was staying at a hasukjib, and the ajumma came out, and I was there with a North Korean friend of mine, and she asked her, oh, where are you from? And the girl said, oh, I'm from Pyongyang. And the ajumma was like, what? How? How are you from Pyongyang? And then she just kind of stepped back, and she was just sort of made very uncomfortable by it. And I had a very similar experience in Tokyo, in the Korean region of Tokyo, with, again, I was staying at like, a room that you rent in a house temporarily, and one of the people who was there was a North Korean man, but he had told the ajumma that he was Choe Sang-hun. And when he left, I accidentally said to her, oh, well, that North Korean guy, wasn't he nice? And she was like, what? He wasn't North Korean, he was Choe Sang-hun. And I said, no, he was North Korean. She said, oh, that explains why he couldn't speak Chinese. And I said, yeah, and she was like, oh, so for me, how it's represented on the media, I think is one thing. I think the media in South Korea engages a kind of fantasy of an intellectual unification with North Korea that doesn't have to be realized on the physical level. But when North Koreans are in South Korea, that threatens that kind of celluloid fantasy. And, so I think in terms of the media, it might be something that, it's less complicated, but in reality, I don't know whether they took a vote. I'm sure they've done research about how many South Koreans would want to marry a North Korean and things like this. There's been some new research done, but it's very fraught. It's very suspicious. It's very complicated. So.
Hi, my name is Joy Kim. I'm the curator of the USC Korean Heritage Library. About 2 days ago, I heard a rumor. So I'd like to get your reaction to this rumor related to North Korea. He said that he heard this story from his friend who is a missionary in Kunming, China. And it goes like this. Before Kim Jong-il died, he had a secret pact with Chinese government. So after his death, Kim Jong-il feared that there would be social or military or political unrest, in which case he asked Chinese government to just come into North Korea and just subdue whoever is revolting and just take charge. And I wouldn't have really thought much of it, except many years ago when I met with Kang Young-hun, who is a former prime minister, former Korean general, and I had lunch with him, one-on-one lunch with him. He related similar kind of fear or concerns to me at that time. It was many years ago. He was very wary of China's ambition or whatever about North Korea. So I'd like to, and so ever since I couldn't just get this out of my mind, so I'd like to hear your reaction.
Quick, you got to go write a story.
And it might be true.
You never know.
I guess I say this as a reporter come Korean. Koreans, by nature, they are wary of China. And South Koreans are very concerned about Chinese design on Korean Peninsula. And I strongly believe North Korea has similar fear and concern about China too. And the increasing ties between China and North Korea, they don't necessarily mean that, North Korea doesn't have any option other than to rely on China right now. So that's what they do. But I don't think we should interpret too much out of well, I guess we have to watch it carefully, but it doesn't mean that North Korea has decided to become, has decided to consider China the one and only card they will play. They will always try to play China against other countries. That's what they have been doing, and they will continue to do that. That's in the gene of Korean diplomacy, whether in North Korea and South Korea.
So you're saying that there is no secret after.
Well, to be a little more blunt, Koreans hate China. So, there is a saying. I mean, there's old Koreans must know this saying. Let me say this in Korean first. 중국 사람, 중국놈 믿지 말고 미국 사람 믿지 말고 미국 사람 믿지 말고 서른 사람 속지 말고 중국 사람 조심하고 일본 사람 일어난다. Let me interpret this. Don't trust the Americans. This is a little ditty, Koreans of my age used to sing while jumping ropes as children. This goes like this: don't trust the Americans. Don't be cheated by Soviets. Be careful about Chinese, or Japanese will rise again. I think this pretty much summarizes the Korean mentality, both in the South and in the North.
Did you want to say anything?
I want to leave you with a really disgusting image. No, a North Korean defector, fairly high-ranking defector who was very much on the inside. We were talking about China and how the Chinese treated the North Koreans. And he said to me, the Chinese treat us like the dirt between their toes. And that said everything to me. What you just said about disgust, despising, and feeling that the Chinese have absolutely no respect for them, for what they're trying to accomplish, or who they are, despite all the lips and teeth rhetoric. There is this underlying, feeling.
Well, and the thing is, to jump in before, we're going to have one last question, right? But I think what's interesting about this is, as we mentioned obliquely, there are certain images that you can point out about North Korea in America that resonate, and others that wouldn't. And there are different ones in South Korea that will resonate, despite whether or not they're real or not. And certainly the fear that China is going to take over North Korea is one of them. So it's a very easy argument to make in South Korea about the Chinese influence, despite the fact that, how would he know whether there's a secret pact between two people? You know what I mean? But it's just believable enough that everybody's worried, right? I mean, so there are different images that we have, or different concerns in the different countries. For the final, before we ramp up the session, we'll go to Hall.
Just a tail-on question to what Mr. Choe said. Nobody's mentioned Burma today. What about the Burma model squeezed by China? Could the same thing happen in North Korea? Could we help make that happen?
I've been to Burma 3 times and talking with the Burmese dissidents and the Burmese people during the monk protest and the cyclone disaster. And when I was going to Burma, in the back of my mind, I was trying to compare Burma with North Korea. They are 2 different countries. What applies to Burma, I don't think will necessarily apply to North Korea at all. I mean, North Korea is what you see in North Korea is an extreme version of nationalism. In Burma, Burma is a multi-ethnic country, as far as I understand, and North Korea is just one family. It's a family state. It's built on a very strong belief that they will survive no matter what. They will keep nuclear weapons. no matter how hungry they are, and no matter how much international pressure they will come under. So it's two very different societies, I believe. And despite what we hear from North Korean defectors, I think it's more likely that most North Koreans believe in their system, if not in Kim Jong-il in person. They believe in the system, in this very strong belief system. It's the foundation of a North Korean society. While, we don't have to agree with it, but we have to understand that belief system.
All right, well, I think that's a really nice way to stop. Thank you all to our three panelists for some very interesting insights, and all of you, thank you all for coming. Let's have a round of applause for them. Thank you very much.